We hadn't walked that far from Vercovicium before we reached the renowned Castle 37. We've just made a brew in Castle 37, and a lot of people say, what must it have been like up here in winter for the soldiers? Well, let me put it this way, it isn't all that warm at the moment. It's been blowing a bit of a wind out there, wind chill factor made it rather cool. Inside here though, it's quite warm. So would it have been so harsh for the troops that were stationed up here? Somehow, I don't think it would have been. Anyway, cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, that's cracking. It's long been assumed there were originally 81 mile castles along the length of Hadrian's Wall, each spaced approximately 1 Roman mile. Mile castles are numbered 0 to 80 from east to west. No two mile castles are the same. They vary in both shape and size, but they do share similar characteristics. Each has a north and south gate, even when the north gate leads to a cliff edge and a 100-foot drop. Archaeologists have used this north-south axis to describe the two main types of mile castles which are found along Hadrian's Wall, which makes Mile Castle 37 a long axis mile castle, which is nice to know. To the west, the Selgovonians. As I explain the relationship between the mile castles and the local northern Britannic tribes to Paul, why don't we take a look at what Mile Castle 37 may have once looked like? Most mile castles along Hadrian's Wall would have garrisoned 32 men, 4 contubernums, a contubernum consisting of a tightly knit unit of 8 men. The complement of men would also be responsible for the patrolling of the wall, as well as manning the 2 interval watchtowers which existed between each mile castle. No one really knows just how long a period these men were posted to these mile castles, or how often they were relieved and allowed to return to the main forts for periods of R&R. From Mile Castle 37, we walked along a section of the wind sill known as Steel Rig to Mile Castle 39 at Crag Low, simply enjoying the walk and drinking in the scenic views. And I couldn't resist having a dig at a well-known feature film. Look, you can see our house from here. I can't. Get on my shoulders then. The area was visibly popular with urban campers, so we pitched camp for the night. Making use of an existing hearth and discarded firewood, we enjoyed a hot meal cooked on an open fire, marvelled at the Milky Way as it stretched across the heavens above. For myself, this is the package, the beauty and wonder of life. The next morning, we broke camp early, but I had a bee in my bonnet. England and Wales, wild camping is illegal. So is having a fire. Scotland, that's not the case. We've been wild camping. We had a fire last night. And in that situation, what we did was we started our camp late and we've struck early. It's now 5:30. We have left this campsite in a better condition than we found it. We've actually picked up other people's rubbish and we'll be taking it with us to the nearest bin. The irresponsible camper is the kind of camper I don't particularly like. In fact, none of the serious wild campers like, because you give us the bad reputation. So if you're going to come up here, leave it as you found it, take your rubbish with you and protect what we have. It's very precious and we don't want to lose it. From Mile Castle 39, we headed off towards Aesica, a 4-mile stretch with some more scenic views to enjoy and explore. The weather was becoming more changeable, which only makes a walk more dramatic and enjoyable, but it's something which electronic equipment finds difficult to cope with. And it appeared both our cameras were developing attitude problems. It's worthwhile noting that the toilet facilities such as those at Caulfield's Quarry are open 24/7, which we did make use of. We even dried the cameras under the warm air of the hand-drying machines. Caulfield's Quarry was worked during the last couple of centuries. It closed in 1944, but not before it removed a good quantity of the igneous dolerite rock which lay beneath this section of Hadrian's Wall. Incidentally, just south of the quarry lay the earthworks of a camp which once housed the legionaries who built this section of the wall. And to the west of this camp, there appears to be the remains of a fort which measures some 490 feet by 390 feet. What I'm learning about the history of Hadrian's Wall is that the only thing we know for certain is just how little we know or understand. And the scope that exists for future archaeology and archaeologists is simply immeasurable. As we neared Aesica, a thick, clinging mist drifted silently on the breeze, enveloping the land about us, offering those opportunities for the atmospheric photographs which may one day be fondly translated into a watercolour painting. The mist was now heavy and moisture-laden, but this was Aesica. Behind the scenes, I use Google Earth a lot to try and get a feel for the locations of the forts, as well as their surrounding areas. Then I translate this and other research information into 3D models using various software. With only snippets of information to work from, I can clearly see that the topographic history surrounding these forts creates a far more diverse, complex and interesting tapestry than I could ever hope to capture, interpret
and recreate. And that's true of Aesica, as it is for every fort, mile castle, tower and vicus along Hadrian's Wall. Working from the few pages of text which I gleaned from Durham University's online resource library, why don't we try and briefly resurrect Aesica? Aesica at modern-day Great Chesters is similar to Vercovicium in that its orientation is east to west. It measures 355 feet north to south by 419 feet east to west. It was built flush with the Vallum Wall, and whilst it had 4 corner towers, it only had 3 sets of gates: the Porta Praetoria, Porta Principalis Dextra, and the Porta Decumana. It's unknown who first garrisoned this infantry fort, but by the 2nd century, the 6th cohort of Nervians, a Belgic tribe of Gauls, was certainly stationed here. It's believed the fort may have been built by the 20th Legion and completed sometime around 128 AD. Sporadic periods of archaeological excavations spanning some 200 years have revealed some interesting facts about the overall construction of Hadrian's Wall. We know from plaques and inscriptions found at forts, mile castles, watchtowers and the wall itself that different legions had been responsible for the construction of an entire sectional length of the wall and its defences. But the fort at Aesica had archaeologists scratching their heads for a good number of years. In 1925, renowned archaeologist Gerald Simpson made the discovery of a broad wall positioned in front of a narrow wall which Aesica had been built up against. Effectively, Hadrian had had 2 walls. Then in 1939, when Simpson returned to the site, they discovered the remains of Mile Castle 43, which had clearly been attached to the broad wall. In 1945, the same sequence was identified at Salernum, Vercovicium and Banna. This suggested 2 phases of construction, with a broad wall and mile castle predating the narrow wall and fort. One explanation for this, which seems to have been accepted, is that the broad wall only ever existed as a foundation wall. With any major construction project, there is always various processes, phases and divisions of labour undertaken. The construction of Hadrian's Wall would have been no different, except there was the added complications. This was the new frontier. Not only was the land remote and hostile, but so were the local tribes, both north and south of the wall. The divisions of labour would have taken the form of construction gangs. One or several gangs would have been responsible for the digging out and the laying of the foundation wall. Strategic areas along the proposed route of the wall would have been identified and prioritised as requiring an immediate Roman presence, so as a short-term measure, a mile castle could have been built on top of this foundation wall, by which time the decision to build the wall to a narrow gauge had been made. The mile castle was still being manned even as the fort was being constructed. Only when the fortifications had been completed was the mile castle razed to the ground. The evidence for 2 vallum walls and a mile castle clearly exists at Aesica and is reflected in part at other forts along this stretch of the wall, but it does raise many questions, such as, did this broad foundation wall extend all the way along this section, or did it only extend a short distance from the mile castle? There again, if these mile castles were meant to be temporary fortifications, why not build them from turf and timber? And last but not least, what was actually stopping the Romans from building a narrow gauge wall on top of the broader foundations which already existed. All pieces of the puzzle which await future archaeologists to put into place.